I'm John Young from Kingsley, Napley, and I'm delighted to be joined again by Victoria Ansell from Marktlink, the corporate finance advisors. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about buying companies, when you might want to do that in the context of your business, how it can help, but also what some of the risks are. Victoria, thanks for joining me again. Perhaps you can just tell people who didn't watch our last video a little bit about Marktlink and yourself.
Of course. Thank you, John. Lovely to be with you again. So I'm Victoria Ansell. I'm the managing partner of Marktlink in London. We are an M&A lead advisory boutique operating across Europe. We now have 19 offices across 8 countries, and we focus on advising entrepreneurs across the M&A spectrum. So buy side, sell side, and fundraising, whether from debt or private equity sources. We work across multiple different sectors. We are agnostic in our approach to sectors, but really we are helping try to translate the sometimes impenetrable jargon of complex M&A into something that is more digestible, and people can really focus on why are they trying to seek particular outcomes and how can we best support them through processes that are designed for what they're trying to achieve.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So turning to the question of buying another business, if you're an entrepreneur, you've been working on your own business and scaling it organically for some time, why might you want to actually look at buying somebody else's?
There are multiple reasons behind it, John. I mean, firstly, acquisitions can be a great way to scale, relatively speaking, quite quickly. It can be far faster than pure organic growth. You can immediately bolt on additional capabilities, additional team capacity, additional profitability, along with supportive or synergistic service lines, product lines that mean you've got a greater offering to take to your own customer base. So it's about how are you producing a return on investment when it comes to acquisitions? How quickly can you add something on, make sure that it is running effectively as part of the overall business to produce a return? But it's dependent on many factors, not just price.
Absolutely. So I guess there are different things people might target when they're looking at potentially acquiring something. It could just be that kind of straight revenue, add something to the top line on the P&L, but there could be other things as well. It could be technology, it could be expanding geographies, it could be filling in gaps in personnel and skill sets. There could be a whole bunch of different things which people might look to buy.
Very much so, and this is where the characteristics of the target that you are looking at are really important. And again, starting off with that key question around why. Why are you looking to do this? Why are you looking to make acquisitions? What's the intended outcome? And then how will that outcome be achieved and measured? Is the aim to scale for the sake of scaling, just bolting on more revenue? Or in which case it's far less likely that the business will benefit fully from synergies and arbitrage in terms of combined valuation. And you can just add on layers of additional cost without really maximizing the potential to increase profitability and margins. But if it's about a different route to market, a different and tangential but complementary product line, that point about sort of skill sets is really important. Understanding the why you're looking at it and what characteristics are you therefore seeking in a target is really important if you're going to make a success of it.
And I guess something you alluded to there was that it's not just the acquisition itself, it's also what happens afterwards. That's quite important. There's no point just going and buying something and assuming it's going to suddenly produce lots of value. You have to make sure that you do the integration part as well.
Exactly. Ultimately, if you want the result to be that 2 + 2 makes 5 rather than 4, you've got to think about it holistically, and that transition piece, integration piece, and a real reflection around the combined culture. What's the culture you're acquiring? How are you going to completely absorb and subsume that into your business culture? Are you going to try and blend the two? How's that going to impact the teams, both sets of teams? It's really important if you're going to maximize that. Otherwise, there are some alarming statistics from, I think it's McKinsey and various others, that 75% of acquisitions don't realize the value that they are intended to achieve. 25% of teams might disappear within 3 to 6 months following, because the disruption creates a lot of nervousness, a lot of fear, a lack of feeling of safety in one's role. And within a couple of years, you can lose as many as 75% of the people that you are in theory acquiring. So thinking of it not just from a cost perspective, what are we buying, how much are we paying for it, and how many additional millions of revenues are we going to generate, but also that team piece of what do we want this to look like going forward? How are we going to make sure that we give everyone that safe and secure environment? Look, objectively speaking, not everyone is going to survive an acquisition. There might be duplication. There might be non-core aspects of a business that are then wrapped up and discontinued. So it's never possible to say you're going to keep 100% of everybody all the time, but it needs to be part of that initial consideration and how you are then planning your diligence and going into legals and planning your post-transaction integration if you're really going to maximize value.
And I guess that makes a big difference in some, or an even bigger difference in some industries compared to others. And it will depend again on what your why is. So if you're buying a piece of technology in the transaction and that's actually what you want, perhaps the people aren't so important because you've got the tech and your existing team can take it and run with it. Whereas if you are buying a people-based business, a firm of professionals, like a law firm or an accounting firm or something like that, really what you are buying is the people, because the people are the brand, they're the brain power, their time is what you're selling. And if you have a situation where a couple of years down the line they've all left, well, you paid for probably 3 or 4 years revenue multiple for 3 years worth of business. So that's not a great deal.
Exactly that. And every business is different. We said it when we were talking about sell side. Every entrepreneur is different. Their why is different. Exactly the same thing here. And you're absolutely right. Depending on the different kind of businesses, there are different areas that you'd focus on more specifically. I think the point really is that the transaction and the transition are two different things. And they both need proper time and consideration. One might be more straightforward than the other. With a tech business where, yes, the scalability is more straightforward, it's less reliant on individuals, and so on. So it could be that one is just simpler based on the type of business. And yes, business services, which we know is it's a growing sector. It covers a multitude of sins these days, but it still needs consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And if somebody was looking to go on the acquisition trail, how would you and your firm be able to help them?
We can support someone right from inception of that theory of, right, we think we want to go and acquire. How are we going to do that? So we can start right from that sort of zero level, if you like, and talk to them about, again, what are they looking to achieve? What are they looking to acquire? What's the business currently? Can we help identify gaps? What's their own growth trajectory? Where are they trying to get to? And how can we help accelerate that? We can map the market, we can identify potential targets, we can make the initial approaches so that there's a little bit of distance, a little bit of separation. We can review initial information, discuss the pros and cons of different targets. So if we're looking at a handful, a dozen potential targets, well, let's put those all together in a matrix. What might each one bring to the table? How do we want to prioritize these approaches? We can then assess valuation as well, draft indicative offers, help with the negotiation. For larger entities where there's perhaps a far more professionalized business already established, but they might not have their own internal M&A capabilities, again, we can bridge that gap to those slightly smaller targets. We're not too scary to go and approach some individuals and sort of some founders and say, we're acting for XYZ Limited, we're really interested in acquiring your business. Are you happy to have a conversation? So we can warm it up gently in quite a friendly way, but at the same time, elicit that information we're going to need, do that qualitative assessment of it. So then we are presenting back to our client and go, here are your options. Here's the information we've got so far. Obviously, it's limited before you're putting out a non-binding offer or an indicative offer, and until you get into formal due diligence. But we can start that ball rolling so that there can be a far more comprehensive assessment of what the opportunities are that are out there. Once you start getting into negotiations, we can do that on our client's behalf. We can make sure that funding is available, whether we're running a full funding process for our client or utilising existing facilities. We can make sure that we're giving any seller certainty around how we can deliver on the acquisition that we're talking about, deliver on that transaction. So we can also explore with our client, bring in other experts if we need to look at the culture of the target. How does that align? What does that mean to both teams? If you start looking at targets and it becomes very clear that actually they are diametrically opposed cultures, then that might not be something they want to pursue.
Even if it's a great piece of technology or a great geography or great revenue, if you can't make it one business, you're never going to get the value.
Okay.
That's great, really interesting. And I think that growth by acquisition is something that people are going to have to consider much more. Obviously, growth in the economy isn't great, hasn't been great for a long time, and it looks unlikely to change. So different sectors will vary, and there is always growth somewhere. But for a lot of people, I think it is much more worth sitting down now and thinking, okay, if I want to get to a particular point in my business, is it practical to achieve it organically? Is it practical in the time scale that I've got with my plans for my life? And if not, is it actually a better idea to sit down and think about how can I plug the gaps more quickly through acquisition?
Very much so. And interestingly, within Marktlink, we undertake bespoke research that we then sort of report through the Marktlink monitor a couple of times a year. And we've asked a load of entrepreneurs these questions about their appetite for acquisitions. And there tends to be a recognition that acquisitions can be a very good way to grow. It can accelerate things well beyond the organic capabilities. But there's a lot of nervousness about actually taking those steps to get onto that track and go forward with it, particularly when we're looking at overseas acquisitions, perhaps taking a footprint or a foothold in Europe and growing that out. There's a lot of nervousness, particularly within the UK. I think we feel quite safe within our own borders, business-wise, and it's scary to think, well, okay, I'm going to go and set up in France, Germany, Netherlands, Benelux, wherever it happens to be. And we can talk through all of that with people and help them assess the pros and cons. Ultimately, whether they do it or not is down to them. But a big part of this is don't be afraid to have the conversation. It doesn't tie you into anything. But if you don't ask, you might not know. And again, the beauty of what we can do is we can tap into our international network and talk about what's in the market, what multiples are being paid, what are the cultural differences perhaps that one might need to consider and explore before making that step of setting up internationally and exploring other geographies.
Absolutely. And actually, I think Marktlink is a great example of how looking into the wider world can work, because your firm is very successful. I think you're in, 14, 15 jurisdictions in Europe now, and growing very rapidly. So those cultural divides can be bridged. You can really make something happen and add substantial value, not just in the UK, but looking abroad as well.
Exactly that. And it's horses for courses. It won't suit some businesses, it won't suit some technologies, it won't suit some management teams. But if you're up for exploring and talking about how acquisitions might work, then it's a conversation that's worth having. And so the Marktlink monitor was really quite interesting in terms of the data and responses that it's flagged in terms of that appetite. People kind of go, yeah, we could expand through acquisition. Oh, but we're not sure we're going to. They lean back from it rather than having the confidence to lean in. And I think that sometimes it can be due to lack of knowledge, lack of experience, but lack of access to the right advisors. Again, such as yourselves at KN, it's about understanding if we were going to look at acquiring in Germany, France, what would that legal landscape look like? What are the pitfalls that we'd need to be aware of before we even start this ball rolling? And again, having that right deal team, having that right advisory team around you can really make sure that you are thinking through that process thoroughly right from the off.
Absolutely. And just having a conversation doesn't hurt. If you are thinking about changing up how you're growing your business, then do reach out to Victoria. She can have a chat, give you some initial ideas, and then see how it develops, because you may find that there are real opportunities to accelerate as long as you manage the risks appropriately. And the first transaction will always be a bit nerve-wracking, but once you've been through it once, I'm sure it will be become a familiar process relatively quickly.
I think it can do, and I think that that's right. And you mentioned a very important thing there, the risk elements. And critically, we work on both buy side and sell side. We understand the tactics on both sides of the table, which can be very useful for clients. But mitigating risk elements for our clients is an important part of that acquisition strategy, and understanding where their real sensitivities are, where the headroom is, or where there isn't headroom. It helps create the boundaries for not only identifying targets, but also ring fencing how might deal structuring work, what might it look like, and again going out with a preconceived idea at least of what we'd want this to look like. It's not cookie cutter, it's not exact, it's never a one size fits all, but we can make sure that the approach we're making and the framework that we're operating within is something that the acquiring entity is comfortable with, knowing that, okay, if we find the right target, yeah, we've done this preparatory work, we understand that we could accommodate this, we've got the capacity to make sure that this is done really effectively, delivered really effectively.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Victoria. That was a really useful kind of quick summary of what some things you might like to think about if you're thinking about growing by acquisition. I really appreciate you joining me again on the podcast. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, John.